Hi, I'm Joe Porcelli from Glass Craftsman Magazine.
And I'm Tommy G from Manhattan Stained Glass.
Welcome to Get the Lead Out. Today, Tommy's going to show us how to build this beautifully framed leaded glass window. He's also going to show us some really great and useful techniques.
So let's get the lead out and let's get started.
Let's do that.
Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do today is the pattern setup. The design that I have today is a nice little Victorian design that comes out of the little project book by Mary Ann Warner, which is a real good book when it comes to doing lead windows. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is staple down the pattern to a piece of 3/4 inch plywood. Now, I like to use 3/4 inch plywood as my base material because when I'm banging my glazing nails in, holding my pieces of glass together in the lead, it won't shift. The glass won't shift. Now, I know a lot of people use Homasote as a base material. The problem with the Homasote is because it's a soft material, it may allow the piece actually to move as you're leading your piece together. Okay, so the first thing I'll do, as I said, is we'll staple this down. And you want to make sure that you have enough room on your table also to allow whatever material you're going to use as a base when you're building your project, enough room to work with. Okay? So, we're using actually today a stop molding, a 1-inch stop molding. At Manhattan Stained Glass, what we use is a 1 by 2 inch piece of poplar, so it gives it a little bit more meat. But for the project that we're doing today, this will work out perfectly. Okay? So we'll go ahead and nail this down. Oh, before I do that, there's one point that I want to make about measuring your project. And this is very, very important. It's my philosophy in doing stained glass that one process affects the next. So you want to make sure when you're cutting out your pattern, obviously you use the lead pattern shears. Now when you use your lead pattern shears, this allows for the tolerance of the heart of the material. So when you cut out your patterns and then cut out your glass, the glass, hopefully you'll be behind the black line, and that's very, very important because you want to make sure that the leading process goes smoothly. Now if you don't cut your patterns out correctly or accurately, that's going to affect you cutting out your glass, it's going to affect you letting out your pieces, and you're going to have to grind a lot more. So you want to make sure that you cut your patterns and cut your glass out correctly. So again, what we're using as a border material is the 1/4 inch U-channel. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and insert my first piece of glass that, again, I checked my glass to my pattern to make sure that I'm behind the black line. So again, I'm going to insert the glass into the lead, and I'm going to position it right on the black line, the outside of my pattern, which brings me to measuring your pattern. Again, depending on what you do, if you're going into an existing opening like a kitchen cabinet or a window, today we're going to be going into a frame. So what you want to do, the project that we're working on today is 12 by 18. So the first step you want to do is when you're designing your piece, you want to give yourself about a 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch all the way around the perimeter, so when the project is finally built, you know that's going to go into the frame easily, and there's no feeling like that. One thing you don't want to do is get to the end of the project, go to put it into your frame, and it's not going to fit. Then you got to make revisions. It's not a good thing. Okay, so you want to make sure that that measurement is right on the money. So for instance, our piece today is 12 by 18. So what I did was, actually it's 14 by 18. I want to get that straightened out. It's actually 14 by 18. So my rectangle size is actually 13 15/16 by 17 15/16. So that's going to give me that space around the edge. So when I go to put this in the frame, it's going to fit right on the money. Okay. So again, I'm going to set this up, and I see my piece of glass is right behind the line all the way down. Okay, it's a beautiful thing. So once I see that black line all the way down on the design like that, I'm ready to hammer my first piece of stop molding in. Okay, we'll just go ahead and do that. Another nail like this, and we're ready to rock and roll. Okay, now we're going to discuss the tools in building leaded glass windows. The first tool that we're going to discuss is the lead pattern shears. Now, if you notice, the single blade in the lead pattern shears is a little bit thicker than the copper foil shears. This allows for the thickness of the heart of the lead. So when you're cutting your patterns out and then eventually cutting your glass out, this will allow the glass to fit behind the black line, which is very, very important when you're building your window. Okay? The other thing that I like to do with my pattern shears is I like to put a little bit of oil on either side of the blade. Okay? This will allow me to go through my pattern easily, no matter what kind of material I'm using. Some people use pattern paper, some people use regular paper. So this will allow me to do that easily. The other benefit to doing that is that it will allow your pattern shears to last a lot longer. Okay? And it's very important because we want to do glass cost effectively. So tool maintenance is very, very important. The next tool that we're going to discuss is the glazing knife. Okay? This particular knife is modified a little bit where, you see I have a lead piece at the end of the knife and also a notch right here. The knife that's available now is made without the lead nub on the end and also that little notch. So you can modify your tools any way you want. So now I'll show you basically what that allows me to do. And these nails are probably one of the finest nails in the world. These are the German glazing nails. Okay? So when I go to hammer the nail in, you can see I don't have to pick up another tool. And now when I go to take the nail out, it allows me to pop it out very easily. Okay? Now, it's very, very important to keep that knife really, really sharp. So basically what I use is a stone and a little bit of oil, like this. And as I'm building my project every so often, what I'll do is sharpen my knife. It's very important to keep your blade very, very sharp. Okay? Then what I'll do is use probably what you could find in your kitchen. It's the Echo knife sharpener, the little kind of blades on the center. And that'll allow me to kind of just tweak it a little bit more and sharpen my blade. Now the next tool that I'm going to use actually isn't a tool at all. It's a little piece of paraffin or wax. A lot of people doing lead windows don't use wax, and they find it very to go through any of the materials, the lead. What this allows you to do is to go through the lead very easily. Move this over here, and I'll get a piece of lead, and you could see how easy it is for me to go right through the material, again, without marring the material or bending the material. The next tool is lead nippers or lead dikes. Okay? These allow you to cut the lead very quickly and easily. I'm going to show you how to use both of these tools today. Again, I primarily use a lead knife, and I'm going to show you how to use it to its advantages. Show you the advantages of using a lead knife. Okay? Again, the lead dikes. The next tool is a glazing hammer. The glazing hammer is designed where it has a hard surface and a soft surface. Some glazing hammers are made, again, so that you can tap your glass very gently with the soft surface as you're building your project. I mentioned before the glazing nails. I want to mention them one more time. A lot of people use horseshoe nails when they're doing lead projects because they're just not aware of the German glazing nails. Okay? They are a little bit more expensive, but you get what you pay for. And again, my philosophy is you want to work with the best tools possible doing lead glass windows. Okay? And you can see the way the German glazing nails are designed. They'll last a lifetime. They won't bend like horseshoe nails, and they're a lot smaller than the horseshoe nails, which are a lot larger and a lot more cumbersome. So these are the German glazing nails that we'll use today building our project. So those are the tools that we use in doing leaded glass windows. Oh, there's one more thing that I want to mention that's very, very important. You notice the table that we're using today? One important factor in doing glass work is the actual height of any table that you have. It's very, very important. A lot of people don't take this into consideration when they're doing stained glass. Again, depending on your situation, sometimes people have tables that are a little bit lower, but you don't want it to hurt you doing stained glass. Okay? It shouldn't hurt doing stained glass. So you want to make it as comfortable as possible. So this table that we're working on today is basically up to my hip, okay, which is about 36 inches. So when you build your tables in your studios, you want to make sure that it's about up to your hip, and it makes it very comfortable for you to do any of the work that you're doing, whether it's copper foil or if it's lead. Okay, now we're going to discuss the main material in doing leaded glass windows, the lead. You'll find lead comes in different profiles and different sizes. Also different characteristics to the material, and also the stiffness and softness of the material. What we're going to discuss is the different profiles first. The one that I have here is an HF. It's referred to as an HF because the top is actually flat and the bottom is flat. The center is referred to as the heart of the material, and the top and the bottom, the leaves of the material. So you have the leaf and the heart. Again, this is an HF. The next material is an HR. The R refers to the roundness of the material. Again, you have a round leaf, top, bottom, and also the heart of the material. As I mentioned before about the tools, you have different thicknesses of heart. So you've got to be careful with starting a project with a particular type of lead. That has to do with also the profile of the material. So if you start a project with a particular manufacturer of lead, you should stay with that project. So for instance, if you go to buy a 3/16 HR to do your window, that's what we're going to be using today in our project, okay? You should stay with that particular manufacturer and get enough material for that particular project. So what you don't want to do is you don't want to run short and then go back to your retailer and maybe he'll be out of the material. So you want to start and finish a project with one type of manufacturer because, again, the characteristics of the material will differ. The roundness of the material or the characteristic of the leaf. Okay? Very, very important. Now the other thing that you'll notice is you'll have a space between the leaves. Generally that space is about 4 millimeters. Okay? Some materials may be a little bit thinner. Now we all know that stained glass or colored glass is approximately 1/8 of an inch. Okay? The lead is basically manufactured, or this particular lead is manufactured to accommodate the 1/8 inch material with a little bit of space in order to putty the windows. Okay? Now, this material that we're going to be using today is a 3/16 HR. This is probably the most popular size material, the 3/16 HR, in a lot of different projects. Now, a lot of times I'll be asked questions when I'm doing my lectures and workshops, what particular type of material should you use for any piece that you're doing? Well, if you're doing like a landscape window or a window that has a lot of curves in it, well, an HR is really a good material to do that type of work because it's very malleable and will flow with all of the curves in a piece like that. Now, I've seen in studios where they do use an HF material. What they do is when they bend the material, what they need to do is actually flatten it out as the piece is done. An HF material is really more a material you would use if you're doing straight design or Frank Lloyd Wright style designs. That would work out really well. But again, there's really no rule of thumb. It really depends on the design that you're doing. But as I said before, the most popular size is a 3/16 HR. Okay? Now, I want to discuss the U-channel. The U-channel material is a border lead. Now, we're going to get into something else about some of the other leads because there are a lot of studios and a lot of people doing lead work who use an HF as a border material. And we're going to discuss that. But this particular material, you can see, is a U-channel. It's a flat U, a 1/4 inch U-channel. There's also materials that are a lot thinner. A lot of copper foil artists use a sun catch lead like this, a very, very fine material as a border material because it gives you a nice clean look as opposed to just doing an edge bead on your piece. So it's a good idea if you're using a small sun catch lead, if you're doing a copper foil piece, it gives you a nice clean look. Okay? Now, as I mentioned before, we do have a lot of artists that use an HF lead as a border material. The reason they do that is if you're working with an opening that may not be totally square or it's an older window, what you're able to do is actually get the edge channel and rasp it down after the project is done if you're unsure of the size of that window. So it's very, very important, again, to size that window and know what material you're going to use. So as I said, using the HF as a border lead will give you the flexibility later after the project is done to actually kind of just rasp it down to make it fit into that opening. Now, the leads generally are made of different metals, obviously primarily lead, but one component of the material will give it its stiffness. That's the antimony content. Okay? So the higher the antimony content, the stiffer the material will be. I like kind of a nice workable material so that when you do cut through any of the materials, you're able to do that with ease, as you could see right there. Okay? Now, even cutting through an HF material, you should be able to do that very easily with a lead knife, so long as it's nice and sharp. So again, depending on the antimony content, that will refer to the stiffness of the material. As I said before, you want to make sure when you start a project using a particular manufacturer of lead, you want to finish that project with the same material. Now we're going to discuss the most important aspect of doing any stained glass project, safety. It's very important to take all safety precautions when you're doing stained glass, whether it be copper foil or whether it be lead. Now I know in Manhattan Stained Glass, what I do in my beginner classes and also on through the workshop classes is I emphasize safety. First thing I do is I give my students the MSDS sheets. The MSDS sheets are the material safety data sheets of any of the chemicals or lead or materials that we're using doing stained glass. Now you should have access to the MSDS sheets through your retailers or wherever you buy your stained glass supplies. It's very important that you have access to this information. Now the next thing that you should consider is handling the material. Now we're going to be doing lead work, so obviously you're going to be in close contact with this material. Now what you want to do is make sure that you don't eat, you don't drink, or bring your hands that now are going to have lead on them, on your fingertips, to your mouth or to any part of your body. So it's very important to clean after you're doing any of your lead projects. What I usually do is after I'm finished, I'll have some residual lead on my fingertips, so I'll get a brush, a hand brush, and soap. I'll make sure I soap up my hands really well, and then I'll get the brush and clean them and brush them really well to take any of that residual lead off of my fingertips. It's very important. Now that the window is glazed or leaded up, it's time to introduce the flux to the work area. Now, it's very important to have proper ventilation when you're soldering up your window. A lot of people don't consider ventilation, and it's very, very important. Now, you could do this by a couple of different ways. You could either have a window open or have a fan blowing the fumes away from your work area. It's a good idea to have that cross ventilation. Good air in, bad air out. Very, very important. The other thing is you want to make sure you wash your hands really well, because now you're going to be handling the flux or the zinc chloride. So it's very important to make sure you wash your hands after every session of soldering. Now, the other thing that's very, very important is if you really start to get into stained glass work, you may want to consider purchasing a HEPA filtration system, which we're going to be using later on in this video. Now that the window's been fluxed, we're ready to solder our window together. Today we're going to be using a 60-40 solder. It's 60% tin, 40% lead. There's also a 50-50 available. It's 50% tin, 50% lead. Now the difference is the tin could be a little bit stronger because of the higher tin content. The 50-50 will flow a little bit easier. Now there's also lead-free solders on the market, but they're generally not used in doing leaded glass windows. As I said before, you want to make sure you handle this material correctly and make sure you clean, because you want to take the same precautions in handling the solder as you do any of the other chemicals in doing stained glass. Another important responsible aspect of doing leaded glass windows is properly disposing your lead scraps. It's very important not to throw the lead scraps right into the garbage. Most studios accumulate 40 or 50 pounds of scrap and will bring them to their recycling center so that they can be recycled properly. As you can see, I added a stop molding to the side since last we saw our lead project. First step I'm going to take is stretching my lead by the use of a lead stretch. So when you purchase the lead, generally it comes in a 6-foot length. So what I'm going to do is insert the lead into the lead vise. Now, it's very important to make sure that your lead vise is secure. You could do that by using a C-clamp or also just drilling it into the side of the table. Next thing I'm going to do is make sure that that lead is in there securely and pull it as I get ready to stretch the lead. Now what I'm going to do is I'm grabbing it with a pliers, and I'm going to try to keep my arm nice and straight. Then I'm going to pull, not jerk, very gently. I'm just going to pull the material, and you could see how the kink comes out. That's it. All you should do is stretch your lead about an inch, inch and a half. That's it. If you stretch it more than that, what you're doing is you're actually making the inside between the leaves thinner. So an inch, inch and a half is fine. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it right in half and handle it in such a way that it's not going to bend on me. Okay? So now you can see I have manageable pieces of lead that I'm working with. The next process that I'm going to do is start to lead my window up. I'm going to grab my U-channel, because I know that's going to be my border material. Okay? And actually this piece is a little short, so why don't we grab a longer piece? There you go. And I'm going to cut one end so I could work with a manageable piece of channeling. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a fid to open up the channel. I do this because in this particular project I used a hand roll material, which may be a little bit thicker than a standard machine roll glass. So I'm going to get my fid and very gently open up the channel so that the glass goes in easily. So now what I want to do is I want to make a mark on the end of my lead right here, right on the line. Okay? Then we'll cut this. Boop, and you can see how easily that knife goes through the material. I'll get my glazing nail, tap that in order to hold that channel in securely. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the piece, so I'm working with a manageable piece of lead, and we'll run that fid through. Beautiful. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a gauge, okay, to gauge where I'm going to cut my next piece of lead. Knowing that this is going to be my last piece of lead to close the project up, I want to gauge cut this. So I'm actually cutting it short on the top, like that. Okay? Another thing that you'll notice me doing with the lead knife is opening up the channel. Okay? So you may have to do that as you're building your window. Okay? Now, you'll notice how I hold the pieces of nail, the nails, okay, in order to put them in securely, because I don't want this to shift as I'm building the window. Okay. Now, I'm going to show you how to cut the lead correctly. So I'm going to grab a piece of the 3/16 HF lead and run my lead knife through the wax. Now, it's very important to note that you have to be very, very careful when using your lead knife. So, you want to make sure that you have command of your lead knife and hold it correctly. So what I'm going to do is I'm holding it down like this, and you could see the position of my arm nice and straight. And what I'm going to do is rock the knife back and forth from left to right, and this allows me to go through that material like butter, okay? And do it one more time, back and forth, that way. So what I'm actually doing is I'm opening up the top leaf of the material, and I'm allowing the lead knife to do all the work, okay? A lot of people, when they're taught how to do lead, they rock the knife this way, and what winds up happening is they go like that, and they bend the material. Obviously, that's incorrect. So, what you want to do is back and forth, left to right, and you can see how easily you go through the material. I just want to prove my point. If you noticed, I could take a sliver of lead this thin and, obviously, not mar the material. Okay? So, if you rock the knife left to right and get that action down, you'll be able to go through all different types of lead cleanly and easily. Okay? All right, so I'm ready to start building my window. I'm going to start with the border. Generally, I like to work from left to right, working outward this way. Okay? Now, the next thing that I have to note is I want all of my vertical strands of lead to be continuous. Okay? Reason being is this window is going to hang vertical. So what I want to do is I want to keep all of those pieces of lead continuous. That's going to give me a lot more strength in the window. Okay? So I'll grab my first piece of glass, insert it into the channel, and I want you to notice where that piece of glass sits. Now, you could see that you see the black line. That's perfect. You want to make sure that you could see the black line, okay, so that your leading process goes smoothly. Now, I want you to notice this piece of lead. It's off a little bit. There's a little bit of an angle. So as I'm leading my window together, what you'll notice is I'm going to be straightening out my lead. I do this by doing this process. What I'll do is, and it's a quick motion that I do, but I'll slow it down, is I go to the inside heart of the material, and I'm able to cut the lead, then I'll move my thumb and actually flip it, and come straight down. Now this is the amount of lead that I took off. It's very little bit, but I'm able to straighten out my piece of lead. So, I put my first piece of lead in, like this, and what I usually do is I'll cut the lead about a 1/16 of an inch behind the glass. Okay? Take it out. Again, rocking my knife back and forth, be able to go through the material nice and clean. Stick my first piece of lead in, boom, and I'm ready for my next piece of glass. Now, when you're doing a leaded glass window, you're always taking nails out, putting nails in, taking nails out, putting nails in. So you'll get used to that. Okay? So I'll take the nail out, grab my next piece of glass, and now I can start rock and roll and building my window. Now, what you could do is you can actually use a piece of the lead, of the material, as a gauge. So, if I put this piece of lead like this, you're going to notice that the heart is sitting right on the line. So, again, I'll continue to build my window, and I'll just use my knife here, okay, and straighten out my lead, and you can see how quickly I do that action. And now I'm going to show you, using a lead gauge, how to cut this piece of lead for the border, okay? Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut right on the line of that piece of gauge lead, where that's sitting, and then cut right on that mark that I made with my lead knife. Now I could start to build my leaded glass window. And I'll move a little bit faster now. Now, I'm used to just cutting it behind the line, and let's see how accurate I could get by just going behind the line about a 1/16 of an inch. Okay, so there's the piece, and if I put my piece of lead there, it's almost right on the money. So, if you get used to that, you could really move in the process now of letting your border up. The other thing I want you to notice is the only tool I'm picking up is my lead knife. That's it. Okay? So, I'm just going to continue building my border now. And you notice I have a series of nubs here. These nubs allow me to hold the piece of glass in, like that, and start building my window. Boom. Make my mark, like this. Take the lead away, and rock, 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 rock. Boom. Put the piece of lead in. Next piece of glass. Remove the nail. Boom. Nub. Right on there. And again, I don't know if the camera could catch this, but I just want you to notice how close these pieces of lead are butt up against that lead nub. Okay? That's mitering correctly. Making sure those pieces are nice and close. Okay? And we'll straighten out this piece of lead. Again, notice how I'm holding and also controlling every aspect of my lead knife. I'm not just grabbing this and just going like this and cutting it. I'm actually using my finger as a guide, getting behind the glass and cutting that lead. Rock, rock, rock. Boop. And my last piece right here. And beautiful. Okay. And we'll hold this like this. Okay, now that my first border is in, I'm going to grab another piece of lead. And again, notice how I'm handling it. It's very important not to go like this. Just grab your lead and go like this. Oops, that's not good. So you want to make sure that those pieces of lead are nice and straight, because you should be able to look down a border, no matter how big your piece is, you should be able to look down that border, and that piece of lead should be right on the money, really, really straight. It shouldn't be wiggly like that. It's not a good thing. Okay? So what I'm going to do, oops, there goes a knife off the side of the table. So we move these tools over here, like that. Okay? Is straighten out that piece of lead. Now what I'm going to have to do, obviously, is take these nails out. And you got to be very careful when you do this. And notice how I'm holding the glass as I move along, down, removing the nails. Because now what I don't want to happen is I don't want this piece to buckle or those pieces to pop out. Okay? So what I'm going to do now is, knowing that I'm going to have a U-channel on this side of my panel, I need to use the gauge again. So I'm going to put this behind the black line, make my mark like that, boom, okay, and cut my piece of lead, again, rock, 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 through the material, and very carefully, I'm going to just put it right against the glass. Now, another little trick that you could do is if the glass doesn't fit in, you could actually lift the piece of lead from the center. This will allow you to get that glass to fit in correctly. Okay, and boom. And as you can see right here, I'm going to lift it. It pops right in beautifully. Stick this in here like this. And continue to put my nails back on the line where they were before. Now the other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to get a lead nub and I want to put it on the end over here. It's very, very important because again, I don't want this border to shift. Okay, so we'll move along and start the upper border. Now, we'll get my piece of lead over here and watch how quick I could do this. Boop, and flip it. And once you acquire a feel, you can see how quickly this window will start going together. Okay, we'll stick this in here like this. I'm going to put a piece of lead over here on the side of this piece of glass in order to hold this border in. Now, assuming this window was a lot bigger, what I would do is I would obviously continue doing this border all the way down. I would put my piece of lead, I would check it so it's nice and straight, and then move on. Same thing with my upper border. I would finish this entire border, like I'm going to here, because there's only two pieces in here, and then I would just make sure it's nice and straight as I put my next piece of lead in. Well, let's cut this bad boy like this. Boop. Stick that nail like that. And make our mark. Move it like this. Rock, rock, rock. Insert it back in. And okay. Now I'm ready for my second border. Okay? As I said, it's very important to make sure that your glass is cut correctly and behind the line. So when you put it in, you see that black line perfectly. Okay? So now I'll continue to build my window and I'll start my second border. Again, cutting behind the glass. Rock, rock, rock. And grabbing my next piece of glass. And fitting it correctly, getting my nub, sticking my nub right there like that, and boop, and moving along. And you can see, once you start kind of moving, it just becomes very easy to move along building your window. Okay? When I first started doing leaded glass, this is what actually I really enjoyed to do, was the leading process, because you get into a groove of leading. So I would put my headphones on in the studio and I was able to get into the rhythm of doing glass. And it actually becomes like a dance. Okay, almost done with my second border. Oops, slip on that one. Okay, I'm going to get my lead nub, again, holding the side in, like that. Now I want you to notice where the pieces of glass are in conjunction to that black line. They're still right on the money. So if I was to put a piece of lead right here, just cut that like that, notice where the heart is. The heart is right on the line. Now, you're always going to have a little bit of tolerance as you're building the window. So if the pieces aren't cut super accurately, that's okay, because depending on the manufacturer of the lead, you're going to have a tolerance between the heart of the material and the end of the lead. So that's okay. Okay? And again, I have another long piece that I have to deal with. So we'll cut this, boom, like that. And as I mentioned before, where I have a vertical line, since this piece is going to sit vertically, I want to make sure that I keep this piece of lead continuous. Okay? Boop. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this a little short right here. I made this line, okay? Because what I'm doing now is reading the design. Now, depending on how many windows you do, you've got to acquire a feel for reading the design. The design is going to dictate your next move, okay? So, again, I'll cut this right like that. Being very careful, I'm going to remove my nails. And you can see how beautifully these nails work. As I said, hands down, the best nails on the market. Boop. And I want to make sure that those nails are secure, because I don't want this work to shift. Okay? So, we'll continue moving on. And you could see how quickly this window goes together, as long as those pieces are cut correctly. Boop. Put my piece of lead right there, the lead nub, in order to hold this in. Okay. Straighten out that piece of lead. Make my mark. Take the lead knife away. Okay, and moving along beautifully. Now, I'm going to stop right here. I'm going to put a lead nub there, since I know that this is going to be a continuous piece of lead across. Because basically, what I did over here, I want to do on this side of the window. Okay? So, I'll pop this nail out like this, and kind of clean this area. Again, you want to make sure that you work clean. This piece of lead in like that. Beautiful. And make my mark. Take the lead away. Rock, rock, rock. Put this bad boy back in here like this. And another thing that I want you to notice, what I'm doing, oh, notice this isn't going in. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and lift that piece of lead, which allows me to get that piece of glass in. Now notice how carefully I'm handling the material and pushing. The one thing I don't want to do is I don't want to go push real hard. Because if I start pushing this real hard, what's going to happen? I'm going to start bending the lead. And I don't want to bend the lead. I want to make sure, as I said before, to keep that lead nice and straight. It's very, very important. Okay, our next step is to work into the body of the window. Okay, we'll get our next piece of glass and insert it like that. And we'll put our lead nub over here in order to hold that piece of glass in. And now comes time to read the design. Okay? So, again, ran out of lead, so I'll cut another piece. Stick this over here. And what I'm going to do is I want to try to keep this piece of lead nice and fluid. The way I'm going to go about doing that is I have a nice straight line here, and what I'm going to do is push the lead out this way and then in, and actually keep it nice and contoured. Okay? In. Boop. Make my miter. Now, although it's a very slight miter, it'll make a very big difference when I go to solder my piece together. Okay? And continue moving along like this. Put this piece of glass in. And hold this in place. Beautiful. Now, if I look at my contour here, it's actually rounding off this way. So what I want to make sure is that this side matches this side. I just noticed one more thing, is I want to make sure I move these pieces of lead to be nubbed right on the line, like this. Okay? Beautiful. So it holds that in place. Okay? Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold the piece over that black line and use it as a guide, just like this, in order to get my miter. So, if this is done correctly, it should be right on the money. So again, notice how I use my knife this time. There's my miter, there's my line, and I'm going to bring the knife right down into the lead. And you could see in one full swoop how I could cut that lead perfectly, right on the money. Okay? And we put this like this, and bend the lead down like that. Make my mark behind the glass, as I mentioned before. Rock, 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 back and forth. Stick the lead in like that. Beautiful. And I want you to notice, again, how I'm holding this in place, because I don't want this to shift. Insert the piece of glass like that. Okay? Now, what I'm going to do is shift this up. Take this nail out. Hold it, again, right on the joint, like that. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to get my little wooden lath, if you will, and just push this down gently to get it behind the black line. Now what I don't want to do is I don't want to use metal or kind of push this in like this or tap it. Metal against glass is going to cause an oyster. That's not good. Okay? Everybody knows what an oyster is. It's a little chip of glass a chip out of the glass. Okay? And okay, perfect. All right. Now what I want to do is, as I'm moving along, I still have a lot of curves that I have to do. In reading the design, what I'm going to do is hold the lead above that line and actually curve it. And you could see how nicely that curves. Okay? So I'll use that piece of lead on the bottom as a gauge and a guide. And cut the piece of lead, stick it in here, take this piece of lead, nail out, and boop. Now, you notice this piece of glass right here is a little bit short. That's okay, because again, in the lead, you have the tolerance between the heart and also the end of the leaf. So you have that tolerance. That's okay. So this is back like this, and cut that like that. Okay. Beautiful. One thing that I want you to notice is the miters. Right on the money. Right on the money. Right on the money. Okay? And go for 21, and we'll start rocking and rolling. Okay, so I'm going to come to the side, and I'm going to get my U channel, which is right over here, and cut my manageable piece. Again, using my FID, I'm going to open it up carefully. One thing you got to be careful is you don't want to use a FID that's too wide down here. If you use a FID that's too wide, you may open up the material too much. So we'll put our piece of lead in like this, okay, nice. And again, we're going to come behind a little bit more, okay, to accommodate for that top piece of lead. Now, one thing that may be tough for the camera to pick up is the black line, okay? I'm right behind that black line over here, which is very, very important because, as I said before, I want to make sure that this piece is going to fit right into that frame correctly. Again, notice how I'm holding the pieces in place before I go put that last piece of lead in. Okay, and whoops, let's cut it down and make my mark right on the black line, and open up that channel, and here we go. And black line, black line, black line. Okay. Now, the next step that is actually important is I'm going to get a block of wood now, okay, and very carefully I'm going to tap this window so that it's nice and straight, okay. So, take these nails out and put this just like that, okay, and make sure that I'm behind that black line, which I am, and put these nails in for the last time. And these will hold the entire project securely. And we're going to do the same thing up top. Okay? And we'll start here like this, and move it down, as you can see. There's my black line. And notice I'm putting the nails right on the joint. Moving this down, very carefully tapping it. And there's my black line. And she's all done. The next step that I'm going to do before I solder is I'm going to go along and make sure all of my miters and all my joints are right on the money. So I'll do that right now. Okay, we'll just move this, shift this over. Okay, and these are actually all pretty good. Now, if I have a couple of pieces that are loose, I can actually kind of shift the lead and just push it in such a way that I could get the rest of those miters right on the money. Now, I have a piece that's here that's a little bit short. One that I did before that was kind of short. Okay? So what I'm going to do, I don't know if you're going to be able to see this, but what I'm going to do is actually get the lead knife, put it into the lead, like that, and actually push that piece of lead forward to make up for that little gap. Now, even though I have this little space right here, when I go to solder that together, nobody's going to be the wiser that that is short. Okay? And let me put my last one in right here. And we are all leaded up. Now that our leaded glass window is completed, I'm ready to solder it together. First thing I'm going to do is show you some of the tools I have in my soldering station. We have our oleic acid, which is to solder our piece together, our flux. We also have our 60-40 solder, our sponge, and our paste flux in order to clean the tip of the iron, and of course our soldering iron. The other tool of importance, we have our HEPA filtration system, as we discussed in our safety segment. Okay? We want to assure proper ventilation, so this is certainly going to afford us that. The next step I'm going to do is go along and make sure all of my miters are right on the money. So I'll do that with my lead knife. So I'll go along and make sure that all of my miters and my 3-point intersections meet perfectly, because that is going to afford me a nice clean joint. So now that I'm ready to solder, I'm going to turn on my filtration system. Okay, now I'm going to go along and flux my joints. Now we'll go ahead and start soldering. And one thing I want you to notice is how nice and clean and flat those joints are. And you notice how that solder melts right into the joint. Okay. There perfectly. That's discussed before. Now you have to be careful when you're doing the U-channel material. See it flowing in beautifully. And see, what I'm doing is round in a circle, leave it there for about 2 seconds, and then up again. Flux up the rest of the panel. I'm trying to put that solder tip on a limited amount of the joint, because I don't want that solder joint to extend out further than it should. It's very, very important. And again, you don't want to melt that U-channel. Now you could see the advantages of doing your leading correctly and how clean the joint comes out. It's perfect. Here's a 3-point miter. Cover it up, round in a circle, up, beautiful. So we're going to continue soldering our panel up until all the joints are done perfectly. Now that the first side has been soldered, I'm ready to clean up the flux off of the panel. One thing that I want to point out is how clean all of the joints are. Again, right on the money. So this is going to make a real nice presentation. So I'll go ahead, grab some paper towels. Now, I'm not going to go crazy cleaning this, because I'm going to make a mess of this panel with putty in about another 5 minutes. Okay, so we'll clean this up like this. That's fine. Go ahead and take my nails out. And you can see how that notch helps me out doing that on the lead knife. Perfect. Now, we'll flip this over to this side, and we'll see how nice these joints are on the opposite side of the panel. So again, I'm going to go along with my lead knife and straighten out these joints like this. And you could see a lot of these joints are, again, right on the money. So the amount of straightening out that I have to do is minimal. Okay? Once I do that, I'm ready to solder up the second side. I'll go ahead and turn on my filtration system and do that. Now we're getting into the home stretch. Our leaded glass window has been soldered up and we're ready to do the puttying process. Now, what the puttying process does is it weatherproofs the window and also gives more structural integrity to the window. Let me show you some of the materials and tools that we're going to be using when we putty our window up today. I have the linseed oil based putty. I also have the calcium carbonate or whiting in this can here. We have our putty brush and also an awl, or you could also use a fid in order to pick the putty. I also have a drill mounted brush which works out beautifully. So the first thing I'm going to do is pop the can of putty. Now generally when you buy the putty, because it has a shelf life, you want to make sure that it's not dried out. So usually there's a little bit of linseed oil on the top of the can. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go in there, and again, using my lead knife, which I use for a lot of different applications. Okay? So this is another one. And I'm just going to go in there and get an amount of putty out of the can like this. Okay? And now what I'll do is kind of knead it. So now I want this to become more of a doughy consistency. So as I mix the putty, I'm going to add a little bit of whiting to the mix. Kind of sprinkle a little bit like this, kind of like I'm making a pizza pie, if you will. And we want to knead that. Now there may be a couple of like clumps and chunks in there like that, but the more you knead it, the easier it's going to become to work. Okay, and again, back down on that table and grab some more of that whiting. Now, it's very important to add a little bit of whiting at a time. So what you don't want to do is you don't want it to become too dry. Now, the reason you don't want it to become too dry is the more linseed oil you have in the mix, the darker the patina will be. Okay? That also has to do with how seasoned your brush is. The more you use your brush or the pizzazz brush, if you will, the more you use those two, the more seasoned they'll become, the better the patina you'll get because of the amount of linseed oil that will be in the brush itself. So we'll continue making our putty. Once we get to the right consistency, we'll be ready to putty our window up. Now that I kneaded my putty to its perfect consistency, I'm ready to putty up my panel. I just want to give you an idea of the workability of the material. You look, I could knead it out like I'm making a pizza, so it's perfect. Okay? I also want to mention the amount of linseed oil in the putty. The more linseed oil you have in the putty, the darker the patina is going to be. If you put a little bit more whiting, it may lighten up a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and start puttying my panel. Now, as you can see, what I'm doing is actually hand puttying the piece. Okay? And I want to make sure that that putty gets right into that channel. Okay? Just like this. Now, one thing that you have to be careful is that you don't put too much pressure. Because one thing you don't want to do at this point is put too much pressure and actually crack one of those pieces of glass. That's not a good thing. Okay. The other thing that you notice I did was I secured the panel down by the use of the glazing nails. And you could see how nicely this material is working into the panel. Now the other thing is, this is actually the back of the panel. Doesn't really matter which side you do first. Okay? What will happen with certain leads and certain materials, depending on the consistency of the putty, it may actually seep through the other side because of the channel. Okay? Now when you go into the border, you kind of want to just use your index finger and your middle finger in order to do that, to get it nice and clean and get it into that channel. I'm going to grab my awl or a fid, so you could use either or. Okay? Now you can notice this particular awl has been used for a number of years, so the buildup of the putty on the tool. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead now and actually pick the panel. Now notice what I'm doing here. I'm rolling the putty over the panel as I pick. So I'm going to pick and then pick up the excess with that ball of putty. Okay, works out beautifully. And roll that putty over. And I'm going to continue this process until the entire panel is puttied up. I went ahead and flipped the panel to the front side, and I'm just finishing up puttying that side. And again, you could see that little trick of picking up the excess material as I roll the putty across, like that. I'm going to add a little bit of whiting on top of the panel, because right now you see there's a glaze of linseed oil. Okay, that's not only going to shine the panel up later, okay, but we have to take that glaze off a little bit now. So in order to do that, I'm just going to get a little bit of whiting or calcium carbonate, and I'm just going to put a little bit on like this. You don't want to put too much on because you don't want to cause a cloud to come up when you're spreading it. Now, very carefully, I'm going to get my putty brush and just spread that whiting across the panel like this, and gently. Notice how I'm spreading it evenly across the panel, just like this. Now, what you don't want to do is you don't want to attack this panel, and you don't want to, do this very rough. Okay, very gently. Now, what I'm doing is I'm actually drying up the linseed oil that I have, that glaze of linseed oil on the panel, like that. Okay, once I put the whiting on the panel like this, you can see that glaze coming off, and you could also notice what's happening to the lead. The lead is actually starting to oxidize as I'm running my brush over the panel. Now that I have that all spread evenly, I'm going to go ahead and turn on my shop vac and vacuum that excess up like that. Okay, I see I need to put a little bit more whiting on here because I still have a little bit of a glaze. So I'm just going to put a little bit more, just like that. And again, use my brush to kind of spread it across the top, like that. Now I could kind of feel that glass actually shining up now. This is going to give me a beautiful glaze on the glass. in addition to a real nice patina. Okay, like that. And perfect. Let's go with that shop vac again. Now the next step, I'm going to get my putty brush and I actually brush the panel in order to darken that patina and get that glaze that I was telling you about before. Now again, depending on how seasoned that brush is, you could see how nice and deep those joints are getting. Okay, let me just move these nails out of the way. Now this takes a little bit of elbow grease to do it with a putty brush, and you want to make sure if you use a putty brush, you have a natural bristle putty brush. It's very, very important. Now I'm going to also show you another tool that's a welcome addition into my studio, and that's the pizzazz brush. Okay? And let me just peg this panel down again real quick. Now this makes what was a very labor-intensive job very easy, and you're going to see why. I want to point out how deep all those joints are, and again, how nice and clean all those joints are. Go over it one more time. Now you can actually see that beautiful glaze that I was mentioning before that you get after you use the linseed oil putty, the whiting, and also either the putty brush or the pizzazz brush. Now we're ready to frame our piece up. Now that our leaded glass window is completely finished, here's where accurate measurements really pay off. Now one thing I want to mention again is each process affects the next. If you're going into regular frames or if you're going into an existing opening, having that 1/16 of an inch or 1/8 inch tolerance all around is very, very important, because this is the process that you want to go smooth as ice. So let's see how things worked out here. First thing I'm going to do is drill our frame together, and okay, guys, let's see how we did. Beautiful. Now again, framing any piece, you have to be very, very careful and make sure if you're using a cordless drill or if you're using a regular hand drill, what you don't want to do is obviously crack the frame either, so you got to be very, very careful. And you could see what I said really holds true. A beautiful job.
You know, Tom, it was great watching you build this panel from scratch today. Now, you correct me if I'm wrong. You use the same techniques on this window that they've been using on church windows for thousands of years.
Yeah, Joe, these are all traditional leaded glass techniques that we did today.
And they still hold up.
Oh, certainly do.
Wow. And anybody can really learn how to do leaded glass.
Taught correctly, this will be the result.
And you got the lead out, didn't you?
There you go. It's a beautiful thing.